The medical chart trembled in Sarah's hands as she stood in the doorway of her childhood bedroom, watching her mother carefully fold white silk fabric into tissue paper. The room smelled of lavender sachets and her sister's expensive perfume, but what made Sarah's stomach lurch was the familiar wedding dress draped across her old desk chair, the same Vera Wang gown her parents had refused to help purchase for her own wedding 3 years ago, claiming the family budget was too tight that year. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. "Oh, sweetheart," her mother said without looking up, her voice carrying that practiced cheerfulness reserved for delivering disappointing news. "I didn't hear you come in. We're just getting Emma's dress ready for the final fitting tomorrow. The wedding is only 6 weeks away, and there's still so much to coordinate." Sarah's grip tightened on the surgical consultation papers she'd driven 4 hours from Chicago to share with her family. The words, "urgent intervention required," and "recommended surgery date October 15th" seemed to blur together as she stared at the elaborate wedding preparations scattered throughout the room. October 15th was the same date circled in red marker on the wedding planning calendar taped to her old vanity mirror. Her mother finally looked up, and Sarah watched the familiar expression cross her face, the one that appeared whenever Sarah's needs conflicted with family plans. It was the same look she'd worn when Sarah had to miss Christmas dinner for her medical residency rotations. The same expression when Sarah's graduation ceremony from medical school fell on the same weekend as Emma's sorority formal. "What brings you home, dear?" her mother asked, though her attention had already shifted back to the delicate beadwork on Emma's veil. "Emma will be so excited to see you. She's been hoping you could take some time off to help with the wedding preparations." Sarah held up the medical papers, her voice steadier than she felt. "I need to talk to you and Dad about something important. It's about my health." The words hung in the air, but her mother continued adjusting the veil's placement as if the significance hadn't registered. "Of course, sweetheart. Your father's in his study going over the final head count with the caterers. This wedding is going to be absolutely perfect. 300 guests at the Fairmont, and Emma chose the most beautiful October theme. The photographs are going to be stunning with all those autumn colors." The irony wasn't lost on Sarah that her potential surgery date had been chosen not for her convenience, but because it was the only opening her specialist had available for the next 3 months. The tumor growing near her spinal cord couldn't wait for a more convenient time, but apparently that conversation would have to. Sarah Martinez had always been the responsible daughter, the one who chose practicality over popularity, medical school over marriage right out of college, and a modest apartment in Chicago over the sprawling family estate in Westfield, Connecticut. At 31, she was a successful emergency room physician at Northwestern Memorial Hospital, respected by her colleagues and loved by her patients. But standing in her childhood bedroom, surrounded by evidence of her family's latest grand celebration, she felt like the awkward teenager who never quite fit into their world of country club memberships and charity galas. Her younger sister Emma had always been the family favorite, and Sarah had made peace with that years ago. Emma was the social butterfly who'd married David Whitmore straight out of college. David, whose family owned half the commercial real estate in Connecticut, and whose mother served on the hospital board that had funded the new wing at Westfield General. It was a perfect match in their parents' eyes, beautiful, connected, and financially advantageous for everyone involved. Sarah had taken a different path. After completing her undergraduate degree in biology, she'd chosen to attend a state medical school on academic scholarships rather than accept her parents' offer to pay for an Ivy League education that would have come with expectations about her future specialty and practice location. She'd wanted to work in emergency medicine, to help people regardless of their ability to pay, not manage a comfortable private practice treating the worried wealthy. The man she'd eventually married reflected those same values. James Martinez was a high school history teacher when they met at a community health fair where Sarah was volunteering. He was passionate about education reform, coached the debate team, and drove a 10-year-old Subaru that he maintained himself. Their wedding had been a simple ceremony at a local garden, with a reception at the community center where James taught evening GED classes. Sarah's parents had attended, but their disappointment in her choices had been palpable. "Couldn't you have found someone with a bit more ambition?" her mother had whispered during the reception, watching James help elderly guests to their seats. "Teaching is noble, I suppose, but hardly a career that will provide the lifestyle you're accustomed to."
What her parents didn't understand was that Sarah had never wanted that lifestyle. The pressure to maintain appearances, the constant competition with other families, the way every decision was filtered through how it would look to their social circle, it all felt suffocating. James represented freedom from those expectations, and their life together in Chicago was built on shared values rather than shared bank accounts. Now, 3 years into their marriage, Sarah was facing the biggest medical challenge of her life, and she'd driven home hoping for support from the people who should love her unconditionally. The tumor pressing against her spinal cord had been discovered during routine scans after she'd experienced persistent back pain and occasional numbness in her left leg. Her neurosurgeon, Dr. Patricia Chen, was one of the best in the Midwest, but she'd been blunt about the urgency of the situation. "We're looking at a window of opportunity here, Sarah," Dr. Chen had explained during their consultation. "The tumor is benign, which is good news, but its location means we need to act before it causes permanent nerve damage. I have an opening on October 15th, and I'd strongly recommend we proceed then. If we wait much longer, we risk complications that could affect your mobility long term." The surgery itself carried risks. All surgeries did, but Dr. Chen was confident about the outcome. The recovery would be significant, requiring 6 weeks of restricted activity and physical therapy, but Sarah was young and healthy otherwise. The timing, however, was not.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Negotiable. Dr. Chen was leaving for a sabbatical in Switzerland immediately after October 15th, and the next available surgeon with her expertise wouldn't be available until January. January might be too late, Dr. Chen had warned. "We're already seeing some concerning changes in your latest MRI. I wouldn't recommend waiting." Sarah had initially planned to handle everything herself, to schedule the surgery and manage her recovery without burdening her family during what she knew was a busy time for them. But James had insisted she tell her parents, pointing out that family support during major surgery wasn't a luxury, it was a necessity. "They need to know, Sarah," he'd said the night before she drove to Connecticut. "This is serious, and you shouldn't go through it alone. Whatever differences you have with your parents, they love you and they'll want to help." James's faith in people's fundamental goodness was one of the things Sarah loved most about him, even when her own experience with her family suggested otherwise. She'd agreed to make the trip, hoping he was right, hoping that a medical emergency would put things in perspective for everyone involved. Now, watching her mother fuss over wedding preparations while surgical papers sat ignored on the bedside table, Sarah wondered if she'd been naive to expect anything different. Her father appeared in the doorway, cell phone pressed to his ear, deep in conversation about floral arrangements and seating charts. He held up one finger when he saw Sarah, signaling her to wait while he finished coordinating some detail about the rehearsal dinner. "The Peterson table needs to be moved closer to the head table," he was saying. "Yes, I know we discussed this, but Emma specifically requested it. David's grandfather will want to be able to hear the speeches clearly." He paused, listening, then continued. "And make sure the photographer gets shots of the Peterson family during cocktail hour. Robert Peterson just made partner at Whitmore Sterling and Associates, and David's father wants those relationships properly documented." Sarah felt the familiar knot of frustration forming in her stomach. Even her sister's wedding was being orchestrated as a business networking event, another opportunity for their father to strengthen the connections that mattered to his consulting firm. She'd grown up watching these calculations, the way every social interaction was evaluated for its potential professional benefit, the way relationships were commodified and cataloged. When her father finally ended his call, he turned to Sarah with the distracted smile she remembered from childhood, present but not entirely focused, as if part of his attention was always reserved for more important matters. "Sarah, wonderful to see you, sweetheart. Sorry about that call, but you know how these events can get. Every detail matters when you're hosting 300 guests." He kissed her cheek perfunctorily. "Your mother mentioned you wanted to discuss something. I hope it's not about taking time off work for the wedding activities. I know your schedule is demanding, but Emma really needs her maid of honor to be present for the final preparations." Sarah held up the medical papers again, this time more insistently. "Dad,
I need to talk to you both about a surgery I need to have. It's scheduled for October 15th, and it's quite serious." Her father's expression slightly shifted, a flicker of concern crossing his features before settling into what Sarah recognized as his
Problem-solving mode. Surgery? Nothing too serious, I hope. Can it wait until after the wedding? October 15th is Emma's big day, and we've had this date reserved for over a year. The deposits alone. The surgery can't wait, Sarah interrupted, her voice rising slightly despite her efforts to stay calm. I have a spinal tumor that needs to be removed immediately, or I could face permanent nerve damage. My surgeon only has one available date, and it's October 15th. The silence that followed felt heavy with unspoken calculations. Sarah watched her parents exchange the look she'd seen countless times before, the one that preceded difficult decisions about family priorities and resource allocation. Her mother was the first to speak. "Oh, sweetheart, that does sound concerning. But surely there must be other surgeons available, other dates. I mean, October 15th is simply impossible. Emma's been planning this wedding for 2 years, and we've already sent out the invitations. Everyone's made arrangements. The Whitmore family has flown relatives in from California, and the rehearsal dinner alone costs more than most people's entire weddings." Sarah felt something cold settle in her chest. "Mom, this isn't a scheduling conflict. This is about my health, potentially my ability to walk normally. Dr. Chen is one of the best neurosurgeons in the country, and she's leaving for Europe right after my surgery date. If I don't have this procedure done on October 15th, I'll have to wait until January, and by then—" "January sounds much more reasonable," her father interjected, clearly relieved to have found a solution. "After the holidays, when things settle down. Emma will be back from her honeymoon by then, and we'll all be available to help with your recovery. It makes perfect sense to wait." The casual dismissal of her medical urgency hit Sarah like a physical blow. She stared at her parents, searching their faces for some sign that they understood the gravity of what she was telling them, but found only the same self-centered reasoning that had characterized every major decision in their family for as long as she could remember. "You're not listening to me," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. "This can't wait until January. The tumor is growing, and every week we delay increases the risk of permanent damage. I'm not asking you to cancel Emma's wedding. I'm asking for your support during a major medical procedure." Her mother's expression softened slightly, but her words remained unchanged. "Of course we want to support you, darling, but you have to understand our position. Emma's wedding represents a significant investment, both financially and socially. The Whitmore connection opens doors for your father's business, and frankly, for Emma's future as well. We can't jeopardize that relationship over a scheduling conflict." "A scheduling conflict?" Sarah repeated, incredulous. "Mom, I could end up in a wheelchair if this surgery is delayed too long." "Don't be so dramatic, Sarah," her father said, his tone taking on the patronizing quality she remembered from childhood arguments. "You're a doctor. You know these medical situations are rarely as urgent as they first appear. Get a second opinion, find another surgeon, explore your options. There's always a solution that doesn't require disrupting everyone else's plans." The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, but Sarah already knew how it would end. Her parents suggested she consider having the surgery in January.
Connecticut, where they could keep an eye on things while still attending Emma's wedding. When Sarah explained that Dr. Chen practiced exclusively in Chicago and that transferring her care would mean starting over with a new medical team, her mother suggested she ask James to handle her recovery needs so the family could focus on the wedding. "James is such a caring husband," her mother said, as if this settled the matter entirely. "I'm sure he'll take excellent care of you. And really, Sarah, it might be better for you to recover at home anyway, rather than here where there will be so much wedding excitement. You'll want peace and quiet, and we'll be absolutely frantic with last-minute preparations." As Sarah sat in her childhood bedroom that evening, surrounded by wedding favors and centerpiece samples, she felt more alone than she had since her diagnosis. Emma had returned from her bachelorette party planning session, and the conversation had briefly shifted to Sarah's medical situation, but even her sister's response had been filtered through wedding priorities. "That's really scary, Sarah, and I'm sorry you're dealing with this," Emma had said, genuine concern in her voice. "But surely you can find another date. I mean, October 15th is my wedding day. I've dreamed about this day since I was little, and having you in surgery while I'm walking down the aisle would just cast a shadow over everything. Can't you ask your doctor to make an exception?" Sarah had tried to explain the medical realities one more time, but the conversation had quickly returned to wedding logistics. Emma was stressed about the final head count, worried about the weather forecast, and anxious about managing the expectations of David's demanding family. Her upcoming surgery became just another item on a long list of complications that might interfere with the perfect wedding Emma had been planning. That night, Sarah called James from her childhood bedroom, surrounded by the evidence of her family's priorities. She'd been holding back tears all day, but hearing his voice broke down the last of her emotional barriers. "How did it go?" James asked gently, though Sarah suspected he could already tell from her silence. "They want me to postpone the surgery until after the wedding," Sarah said, her voice thick with unshed tears. "They think it's just a scheduling conflict, something we can work around for everyone's convenience." James was quiet for a long moment, and Sarah could practically hear him processing this information, his natural inclination to see the best in people warring with his protective instincts toward his wife. "Did you explain the medical urgency, the risks of waiting?" he finally asked. "I tried, but you know how they are, James. Everything gets filtered through what's convenient for them, what maintains their image, what serves their interests. Emma's wedding is a social and business opportunity, and my surgery is just an inconvenience." "Sarah, I'm so sorry," James said, and she could hear the anger building in his voice, not at her, but for her. This is exactly the kind of situation where families should rally around each other, where everything else becomes secondary to your health and well-being.
They spent the entire celebration dinner talking about how I should have chosen something more prestigious, more lucrative. "That doesn't make this okay," James said firmly. "You're facing major surgery, and they're treating it like it's an inconvenience. That's not normal family behavior, Sarah, no matter how you've rationalized it over the years." They talked for another hour, with James alternately comforting Sarah and expressing his own frustration with her family's response. He offered to drive out to Connecticut to speak with her parents himself, to help them understand the seriousness of the situation. But Sarah knew it would be pointless. Her parents had already made their calculations, weighed their priorities, and determined that Emma's wedding took precedence over everything else. "I think I need to just accept that this is who they are," Sarah said finally. "I'll have the surgery as scheduled, recover at home with you, and stop expecting them to be different than they've always been." "You shouldn't have to accept this," James replied, his voice gentle but firm. "You deserve better from your family, especially during something this serious. But I'll be there for everything, the surgery, the recovery, whatever you need. We'll get through this together." As Sarah hung up the phone, she felt both heartbroken and strangely relieved. The heartbreak was obvious. Having her medical crisis dismissed by the people who should care most was devastating. But the relief came from finally accepting what she'd always known but had been reluctant to fully acknowledge. Her parents' love was conditional, based on convenience and social utility rather than genuine care and concern. The next morning, Sarah packed her things while her mother fretted over last-minute wedding details in the kitchen. She decided to drive back to Chicago that day rather than stay for the family dinner they'd planned, unable to sit through another meal where Emma's wedding dominated every conversation while her own medical situation was treated as an afterthought. "You're leaving already?" her mother asked, looking up from her color-coded wedding timeline. "I thought you might want to help Emma with her final dress fitting this afternoon. And your father wanted to show you the seating chart. We've placed you and James at a lovely table with some of Emma's college friends." "I need to get back to Chicago," Sarah said, keeping her voice neutral. "I have some things to arrange before my surgery." "Oh, that's right," her mother said, as if the surgery was a minor appointment she'd momentarily forgotten. "Well,
Do let us know if you decide to postpone it until after the wedding. It would be so much more convenient for everyone, and really, what's a few extra months when you're talking about your long-term health? Sarah didn't trust herself to respond to that logic, so she simply kissed her mother goodbye and headed for the door. Emma appeared as she was loading her suitcase into the car, still in her silk pajamas, her hair perfectly styled even at 9 in the morning. "Sarah, I'm sorry if yesterday seemed insensitive," Emma said, her expression genuinely apologetic. "I know your surgery is important. It's just that this wedding represents so much. For me, for David, for our family's relationship. The timing is really unfortunate." "Unfortunate timing," Sarah repeated, testing the words. "That's one way to put it." Emma stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Look, I know Mom and Dad can be focused on their own priorities."
Sometimes. But they do love you, and they'll come around once the wedding stress is over. Can't you just wait a few more months for the family? Sarah looked at her sister, seeing not malice but a lifetime of conditioning that had taught Emma her needs should always come first, that other people's problems were obstacles to be managed rather than crises to be supported. It wasn't entirely Emma's fault. Their parents had created this dynamic, this hierarchy of importance that placed Emma's happiness above everyone else's needs. "I can't wait, Emma," Sarah said simply. "And the fact that you're asking me to risk my health for your wedding tells me everything I need to know about our family's priorities." The drive back to Chicago gave Sarah time to process everything that had happened, but it also gave her time to feel the full weight of her isolation. She was facing major surgery, essentially alone, with only James for support. Her parents would be busy with wedding festivities while she was in the operating room, and her sister would be walking down the aisle while Sarah was beginning what would likely be a difficult recovery. By the time she reached her apartment, Sarah had made a decision. She would have the surgery as scheduled, focus on her recovery, and stop expecting her family to be people they clearly weren't. It was a painful acceptance, but also a liberating one. She was 31 years old, successful in her career, married to a man who genuinely loved and supported her. She didn't need her parents' approval or participation to live a fulfilling life. James was waiting when she arrived home, having left school early to be there when she returned from Connecticut. He took one look at her face and pulled her into his arms, holding her while she finally let herself cry for everything she'd lost. Not just her medical crisis being dismissed, but her last hope that her family might prioritize her needs for once in her life. "I'm sorry they let you down," James said, stroking her hair. "But you're not alone in this. We'll figure out everything we need for your surgery and recovery. I've already talked to my principal about taking time off, and my sister said she can come help once you're home from the hospital." Sarah pulled back to look at her husband, this man who had never hesitated to put her needs first, who saw her medical crisis as something to face together rather than an inconvenience to manage around other priorities. The contrast between his response and her family's couldn't have been starker. "I love you," she said simply. "Thank you for being the family I actually need." Over the next few days, Sarah threw herself into preparing for her surgery. She arranged for coverage at the hospital, organized her medical files, and met with Dr. Chen to finalize the surgical plan. James handled the practical details, arranging for someone to cover his classes, preparing their apartment for her recovery needs, and researching the best post-surgical care options. Neither of them mentioned Sarah's family during these preparations, but the absence of that support was noticeable. Other colleagues going through medical procedures had family members calling to check on details, offering to help with logistics, planning to be present during surgery. Sarah had none of that, and the silence from Connecticut was deafening. Then, exactly 1 week before her scheduled surgery, Sarah received a call that changed everything. She was at the hospital, finishing her final shift before medical leave, when her phone rang.
An unfamiliar number. "Dr. Martinez, this is Governor Patricia Hendrick's office. The governor would like to speak with you about a matter of mutual interest. Would you be available for a call this afternoon?" Sarah stared at her phone, confused by the unexpected contact. She knew Governor Hendricks by reputation, a progressive Democrat who'd been elected 2 years earlier on a platform of education and healthcare reform,
but she couldn't imagine what business the governor might have with an emergency room physician. "I'm sorry, but I think there might be some mistake," Sarah said. "I'm not sure why the governor would need to speak with me." "No mistake, Dr. Martinez. Governor Hendricks specifically requested this call. She's available at 3 o'clock this afternoon if that works for your schedule." Sarah agreed to the call, more out of curiosity than anything else. Perhaps it was related to some healthcare policy initiative, though she couldn't recall participating in any political activities that would have brought her to the governor's attention. At exactly 3 o'clock, Sarah's phone rang. "Dr. Martinez, this is Governor Hendricks. Thank you for taking my call." The governor's voice was warm but professional, carrying the confidence Sarah recognized in other successful women she'd worked with. "I understand you're facing a medical procedure next week, and I wanted to discuss how my office might be able to assist with any challenges you're encountering." "I'm sorry, Governor, but I'm not sure I understand," Sarah said, genuinely confused by the unexpected attention. "How did you know about my surgery?" "Your husband, James, has been in correspondence with my education policy team about curriculum reform initiatives. When he mentioned your upcoming medical procedure and some family difficulties you were experiencing, my staff thought I should reach out directly." Sarah's mind raced, trying to piece together this unexpected connection. James had never mentioned corresponding with the governor's office, though she knew he was passionate about education reform and had written extensively about innovative teaching methods. "James has been in touch with your office?" Sarah asked, still processing this information. "Dr. Martinez, your husband is quite well known in education policy circles. His research on integrated curriculum design has influenced several of our state initiatives, and he's been consulting with us on implementation strategies. When he mentioned that his wife, a dedicated emergency room physician, was facing major surgery without family support due to scheduling conflicts, it concerned me personally. The pieces were starting to come together, but Sarah still couldn't grasp the full picture. Governor, I appreciate your concern, but I'm not sure how this relates to state business. It relates because healthcare access and family support during medical crises are policy issues I care deeply about. But more than that, it relates because your husband's work on education reform has been invaluable to our administration, and supporting the families of people who contribute to our state's progress is part of how we show our values." Sarah sank into a chair, overwhelmed by this unexpected development. "James never told me he was working with your office." "He's quite modest about his contributions," Governor Hendricks said with a slight laugh, "but his curriculum frameworks are being piloted in 12 districts across the state, and the early results are remarkable." He's declined any formal recognition, preferring to let the work speak for itself. The conversation continued for 20 more minutes, with Governor Hendricks asking about Sarah's medical situation, her surgical timeline, and the support systems she had in place. Sarah found herself opening up about her family's response, though she tried to keep the details diplomatic. "Dr. Martinez, I want you to know that your service as an emergency room physician, combined with your husband's contributions to education policy, makes you both valued members of our state's community. If there's anything my office can do to ensure you have the support you need during your recovery, please don't hesitate to reach out." After hanging up, Sarah sat in stunned silence. James had been consulting with the governor's office on education policy, contributing to statewide curriculum reform, and had never mentioned it. The modest high school teacher her parents had dismissed as lacking ambition was apparently influential enough in his field to have direct access to the state's highest office. When James arrived home that evening, Sarah was waiting with questions. "So," she said without preamble, "I got an interesting call today from Governor Hendricks." James's face went pale, then red. "Sarah, I can explain." "Explain what? That you've been secretly advising the state government on education policy? That your curriculum research is being implemented in schools across the state? That the governor knows about my surgery because you've been corresponding with her staff?" James sat down heavily, running his hands through his hair. I didn't want to make a big deal about it. You know how I feel about people who use their connections for personal gain. The work matters, not the recognition. James, this isn't about recognition. This is about me understanding who my husband actually is. The governor talked about you like you're some kind of renowned education expert, and I had no idea any of this existed. Over the next hour, the full scope of James's professional influence became clear. His research on integrated curriculum design had caught the attention of education policy experts 2 years earlier. He'd been invited to participate in several state education committees, had co-authored policy recommendations that were now being implemented statewide, and was frequently consulted on education reform initiatives. The reason I never mentioned it is because it's not about me, James explained. It's about improving education for kids who deserve better than what they're currently getting. The recognition doesn't matter. The results do. Sarah stared at her husband, seeing him with new eyes. The man her parents had dismissed as simple high school teacher with no ambition was actually a respected expert whose work was influencing education policy at the state level. His modest lifestyle wasn't a sign of limited success. It was a choice to focus on meaningful work rather than personal aggrandizement. James, why didn't you tell me? I would have been proud of you, not judgmental. Because I know how you feel about people who name drop and use their connections for personal benefit. I've seen how your parents operate, turning every relationship into a networking opportunity. I never wanted you to think I was like that. The irony was stunning. Sarah's parents had dismissed James as unambitious and unsuitable, while he was
quietly building influence and making meaningful contributions to education policy. They measured success in terms of visible wealth and social connections, while James was actually changing lives through his work, just not in ways that would be apparent at country club gatherings. So, when you contacted the governor's office about my surgery, I didn't contact them about your surgery specifically, James clarified. I was corresponding with the education policy team about implementation timelines. And when they asked about my availability for a conference call, I mentioned that my wife was having surgery and I'd need to be flexible with scheduling. The governor's staff took it from there. Sarah shook her head in amazement. Her husband's quiet competence and genuine concern for others had earned him recognition and influence that her parents, for all their social climbing and networking, could only dream of. And he'd never mentioned it because he was genuinely humble about his achievements and worried about appearing self-serving. The next morning, Sarah's phone rang with another unexpected call, this time from Emma. "Sarah, I just got the strangest call from David's mother," Emma said without preamble. "She said Governor Hendricks's office reached out to her about our family, something about supporting healthcare workers during medical crises. Do you know anything about this?" Sarah's heart rate quickened. What exactly did the governor's office say? Mrs. Whitmore wasn't entirely clear, but apparently someone from the governor's staff called asking about our family's community involvement and charitable giving, specifically related to healthcare initiatives. They mentioned that they'd heard we had a family member in emergency medicine who was facing a medical procedure, and they wanted to discuss potential partnerships for supporting healthcare workers. The implications were starting to dawn on Sarah. Governor Hendricks hadn't just offered personal support. She'd apparently initiated contact with Sarah's family's social and business connections, framing Sarah's medical situation within the context of supporting healthcare workers statewide. "Emma, I honestly don't know all the details," Sarah said carefully, "but yes, I've been in contact with the governor's office." "You've been in contact with the governor?" Emma's voice rose in disbelief. "Sarah, how do you even know Governor Hendricks, and why is her office calling the Whitmores about our family?" Before Sarah could respond, her phone buzzed with another call. This time, it was her father. "Sarah, I need you to explain something to me," her father said, his voice tight with confusion. I just received a very interesting call from Robert Peterson at Whitmore Sterling and Associates. Apparently, Governor Hendricks's office reached out to him about supporting healthcare initiatives in our community, and your name came up specifically. What exactly is going on here?
Healthcare workers support programs? Her father repeated. Sarah, how are you connected to state government healthcare initiatives? And why didn't you mention this when we were discussing your surgery? The conversation revealed the full scope of what Governor Hendricks had orchestrated. Her office had reached out to several prominent families in Sarah's hometown, including the Whitmores and their business associates, discussing potential partnerships for supporting healthcare workers during medical crises. Sarah's upcoming surgery had been mentioned as an example of how medical professionals sometimes lacked adequate family support during their own health challenges. The political implications were subtle but clear. Governor Hendricks was evaluating community leaders' commitment to supporting healthcare workers, and their response to Sarah's situation would be noted accordingly. For families like the Whitmores, who depended on political connections for their business success, this represented both an opportunity and a test. The governor's office suggested that strong community support for healthcare workers during medical crises reflects well on local leadership, her father continued, his tone shifting as he processed the political dimensions. They seemed particularly interested in how prominent families rally around medical professionals in their own communities. Sarah began to understand the elegant way Governor Hendricks had reframed her family situation. Instead of a personal medical crisis being dismissed for wedding convenience, it was now a test of her family's commitment to supporting healthcare workers, a test that was being evaluated by the state's highest office, with implications for their social and business connections. Within hours, Sarah's phone was buzzing with calls from family members who suddenly had very different perspectives on her October 15th surgery date. The first call came from her mother at 7 in the morning, 3 days after Sarah's conversation with Governor Hendricks. Sarah was preparing breakfast when her phone rang, displaying her mother's number with an urgency that was unusual for their typically scheduled communications. "Sarah, darling, I've been thinking about our conversation regarding your surgery," her mother began, her voice carrying a brightness that seemed forced. "Your father and I may have been too hasty in our response. Perhaps we should discuss this matter more thoroughly." Sarah set down her coffee cup, immediately suspicious of this sudden change in tone. Her mother had never reconsidered a position once taken, especially not one that prioritized Emma's needs over Sarah's. "What's changed, Mom?" "Well, we've had some interesting conversations with community leaders about healthcare initiatives, and it's become clear that supporting medical professionals during their own health challenges is more important than we initially realized. Mrs. Whitmore specifically mentioned how admirable it would be for families to rally around their healthcare workers during medical procedures." The careful phrasing told Sarah everything she needed to know. Her mother wasn't calling out of genuine concern for Sarah's well-being, but because supporting Sarah's surgery had somehow become politically advantageous. The governor's strategic outreach had worked exactly as intended, reframing Sarah's medical crisis from an inconvenient scheduling conflict.
Community leadership test. I see, Sarah said carefully. And how exactly would this support manifest itself? We're thinking of hosting a small gathering before your surgery, perhaps at the country club, to show community support for healthcare workers. Something elegant but meaningful, with some of the area's most prominent families. Mrs. Whitmore suggested it could become an annual fundraising tradition for healthcare causes. Sarah almost laughed at the transparent attempt to turn her medical procedure into a social networking opportunity. Even when trying to be supportive, her parents couldn't resist finding ways to enhance their social standing and business connections. "Mom, I appreciate the gesture, but I don't need a fundraising event. I just need my family's emotional support during a difficult time." "Of course, dear, but why not accomplish both? You'll have our support, and we'll demonstrate our family's commitment to healthcare initiatives. It's really quite perfect timing, with all the attention being paid to these issues at the state level." After hanging up, Sarah realized that Governor Hendricks had created something far more complex than simple political pressure. By framing Sarah's situation within healthcare policy discussions, she'd made supporting Sarah a matter of public positioning for families who depended on political connections. Sarah's medical crisis had become a test of community values that her parents couldn't afford to fail. The next call came from Emma, and her tone was notably different from their previous conversations about the surgery scheduling conflict. "Sarah, I've been talking to David about your surgery situation, and we want to help however we can," Emma said, though Sarah detected an underlying tension in her voice. David's mother has been very vocal about the importance of supporting healthcare workers, especially those in our own families. "That's thoughtful, Emma, but I thought you were concerned about the surgery interfering with your wedding." "Well, I've been thinking about that too. Maybe we can work something out that accommodates both events. David suggested we could arrange for hospital visits, coordinate care packages, things like that. His mother thinks it would reflect well on our family's values." Sarah noticed that Emma's newfound concern was filtered through David's family's opinion, particularly his mother's views on what would reflect well on their families. The Whitmore family's political and social connections apparently made them sensitive to Governor Hendricks' healthcare worker support initiatives, and that sensitivity was now influencing Emma's perspective on Sarah's surgery. "Emma, are you saying this because you're genuinely concerned about me, or because it's become politically important to appear supportive?" There was a long pause before Emma answered, "Does it matter? Either way, you'll have the support you need, and our family will do the right thing. Isn't that what you wanted?" The question highlighted the fundamental difference between Sarah's values and her family's approach to relationships. Sarah wanted genuine care and concern, while her family was offering strategic support calculated to enhance their social and political standing. It was better than outright dismissal, but it still felt hollow and transactional. Over the next few days, Sarah received multiple calls from family members and family friends, all offering various forms of support for her upcoming surgery. Her aunt called, offer her vacation home for recovery. Her father's business partner offered access to private medical transportation. Several of her parents' social acquaintances reached out to express their admiration for Sarah's service as a healthcare worker. The attention was overwhelming, and Sarah suspected entirely orchestrated by the ripple effects of Governor Hendricks' strategic outreach. People who had barely acknowledged Sarah's existence were now eager to demonstrate their support for healthcare workers in general and Sarah in particular. The most revealing conversation came from David Whitmore himself, who called Sarah directly to discuss what he termed the family's healthcare worker support strategy. "Sarah, I want you to know that our family takes these healthcare initiatives very seriously," David said, his tone formal and businesslike. "Governor Hendricks' office has made it clear that supporting medical professionals during their own health challenges is a priority for the administration, and we want to ensure our family is aligned with these values." "David, this is about my spinal surgery, not a policy initiative," Sarah replied, though she was beginning to understand that for her family's social circle, the distinction was irrelevant. "Of course, but the two things aren't mutually exclusive. Your surgery represents an opportunity for our families to demonstrate their commitment to healthcare worker support, which benefits everyone involved. Emma's wedding can proceed as planned, you'll have the support you need for your medical procedure, and our families will be recognized for their community leadership." The conversation revealed the sophisticated way her family's social circle was responding to Governor Hendricks' pressure. Rather than simply rearranging their priorities to accommodate Sarah's needs, they were finding ways to support her surgery while maintaining their original plans and enhancing their political positioning. "So Emma's wedding is still scheduled for October 15th?" Sarah asked.
Absolutely. But we're arranging for family members to visit you at the hospital before the ceremony, and we'll have representatives at your bedside during recovery. Emma will personally deliver flowers and well wishes before leaving for the venue. It's really quite thoughtful when you consider the logistics involved. Sarah realized that her family had found a way to technically support her surgery while still prioritizing the wedding. They would make token gestures toward her recovery, but the celebration would proceed exactly as planned, with her medical procedure treated as a minor logistical challenge rather than a major family crisis requiring full attention and support. The week before her surgery, Sarah received an unexpected visitor at the hospital. She was finishing her final shift before medical leave when a woman in an elegant business suit approached her at the nurse's station. "Dr. Martinez, I'm Patricia Whitmore, David's mother. I was hoping we could have a brief conversation about your upcoming procedure." Sarah had heard about Mrs. Whitmore for years, but had never met her directly. She was known throughout their social circle as a formidable woman who managed both significant business interests and extensive charitable activities. Her presence at the hospital was unexpected and slightly intimidating. "Mrs. Whitmore, what brings you here?" Sarah asked, genuinely curious about this unprecedented visit. "I wanted to speak with you."
Personally, about the support our families are providing for your surgery, there's been considerable discussion about healthcare worker initiatives, and I want to ensure we're handling everything appropriately. They found a quiet corner of the hospital cafeteria where Mrs. Whitmore laid out what she described as a comprehensive support plan for Sarah's surgery and recovery. The plan included hospital visits from family members, meal deliveries during recovery, transportation assistance, and even arrangements for James to take extended leave with financial support from the Whitmore family's charitable foundation. "This is incredibly generous," Sarah said, though she was puzzled by the elaborate nature of the support being offered, but it seems like a lot of effort for a relatively straightforward surgical procedure. Mrs. Whitmore's expression became more serious. "Dr. Martinez, I think we should speak candidly about the current situation. Governor Hendrick's office has made it quite clear that community support for healthcare workers is being closely monitored, particularly how prominent families respond when medical professionals in their own communities face health challenges." The admission confirmed what Sarah had suspected. The sudden outpouring of family support wasn't driven by genuine concern for her well-being, but by political pressure from the governor's office. Mrs. Whitmore was essentially acknowledging that supporting Sarah had become a test of the family's political awareness and community values. "Mrs. Whitmore, are you saying that my surgery has become a political issue?" "I'm saying that everything is political when you're in our position, Dr. Martinez. Your husband's work with the governor's education initiatives, combined with your service as an emergency room physician, makes you both significant figures in healthcare and education policy circles. How our families respond to your medical crisis reflects our values and our commitment to supporting the professionals who serve our community." Mrs. Whitmore went on to explain that several prominent families had been contacted by the governor's office about healthcare worker support initiatives, with Sarah's situation serving as a specific example of how communities could rally around medical professionals during their own health challenges. "The governor's office has been very clear that they're evaluating community responses to healthcare worker needs," Mrs. Whitmore continued. "Families who demonstrate strong support for medical professionals during crises are viewed favorably for future policy partnerships and state business opportunities." The conversation revealed the sophisticated political pressure Governor Hendricks had applied. Rather than directly confronting Sarah's family about their lack of support, she'd made supporting Sarah a matter of political positioning for families who depended on government connections for their business success. "So, supporting my surgery has become a way for families to demonstrate their political alignment with the governor's healthcare initiatives?" "Exactly. And frankly, Dr. Martinez, it's brilliant politics. The governor has made supporting healthcare workers a test of community values, which means families like ours can't afford to appear unsupportive, especially when the healthcare worker in question is connected to education policy initiatives through her husband." Mrs. Whitmore's frank explanation helped Sarah understand the complex dynamics at play. Governor Hendricks had leveraged her office's influence to create a situation where Sarah's family couldn't dismiss her medical needs without facing political and social consequences. It was a masterful use of political pressure to achieve a personal outcome. Mrs. Whitmore, I appreciate your honesty about the motivations involved, but I have to ask, is any of this support genuine or is it all political calculation? The older woman considered the question carefully before responding. Dr. Martinez, in my experience, the motivation matters less than the outcome. You need support during your surgery and recovery, and you're going to receive it. Whether that support comes from genuine family concern or political necessity doesn't change its practical value. It was a pragmatic perspective that Sarah found both realistic and depressing. Mrs. Whitmore was essentially acknowledging that Sarah's family relationships were transactional, based on social and political utility rather than genuine care and affection. I suppose you're right about the practical outcome, Sarah agreed, but it's difficult to feel grateful for support that's primarily motivated by political pressure. Welcome to life in prominent families, Dr. Martinez. Very little is ever purely personal when your decisions affect business relationships and political connections. The key is learning to accept support where you can find it and not questioning the underlying motivations too closely. As Mrs. Whitmore prepared to leave, she made one final observation that stayed with Sarah long after their conversation ended. Your husband has created quite an impressive reputation in education policy circles, Mrs. Whitmore said. Governor Hendricks clearly values his contributions, and she's demonstrated that she's willing to leverage her political influence to protect the families of people who serve her administration's interests. That's unusual loyalty from a politician, and it suggests that James's work is more significant than most people realize. After Mrs. Whitmore left, Sarah sat in the hospital cafeteria processing everything she'd learned. Governor Hendricks hadn't just offered personal support or made a few strategic phone calls. She'd orchestrated a comprehensive political pressure campaign that made supporting Sarah a test of community values for families who depended on political connections. The strategy was sophisticated and effective, but it also highlighted the transactional nature of Sarah's family relationships. Her parents and sister weren't supporting her surgery because they genuinely cared about her well-being, but because failing to support her would reflect poorly on their political awareness and community values. That evening, Sarah shared Mrs. Whitmore's revelations with James, who listened with a mixture of admiration for Governor Hendricks' political skill and concern about the artificial nature of the family support Sarah was receiving. "I'm grateful that you'll have the support you need," James said carefully, "but I'm sorry it took political pressure to make your family prioritize your health. At least now I understand why everyone suddenly cares about my surgery. It's not about me, it's about demonstrating their political alignment and community values." James was quiet for a moment, clearly processing the implications of Governor Hendricks's intervention. "Sarah, I need to tell you something about my relationship with the governor's office. When I mentioned your surgery during our education policy discussions, I wasn't expecting this level of response. I think Governor Hendricks sees supporting you as part of supporting the broader network of people working on education and healthcare initiatives." "What do you mean?" "The education reforms we're implementing affect thousands of students across the state. The governor views the people working on these initiatives as valuable resources worth protecting. When she learned that one of her education consultants was dealing with a family crisis during his wife's major surgery, she apparently decided to intervene." Sarah began to understand that Governor Hendricks' support wasn't just about political pressure on her family, but about protecting the people who contributed to her policy initiatives. By ensuring Sarah had adequate support during her surgery, the governor was also ensuring that James could continue his education work without personal distractions. "So, I'm being supported because it serves the governor's policy interests?" Sarah asked. "You're being supported because the governor believes in taking care of the people who serve the state's interests," James corrected. "It's political, but it's also personal. She sees family support during medical crises as a basic human need, and she's using her political influence to ensure you receive that support." The distinction was subtle, but important.
Governor Hendricks wasn't just manipulating Sarah's family for political gain, but was using her influence to ensure that people serving the state's interests received the support they needed during personal crises. Over the weekend before her surgery, Sarah experienced the full scope of the support system that had been assembled around her medical procedure. Her parents visited to discuss logistics and coordinate with the various family members who would be providing assistance during her recovery. Emma stopped by with detailed schedules showing how wedding preparations would be managed around Sarah's hospital visits. The attention was comprehensive and well organized, but it felt strangely impersonal. Everyone was fulfilling their assigned roles in supporting Sarah's surgery, but the interactions felt scripted and performative rather than genuinely caring. The most telling moment came when her father presented her with a detailed timeline showing how family support would be coordinated around Emma's wedding activities. "We've arranged everything so that you'll have constant family presence during your hospital stay," her father explained, consulting his color-coded schedule. "Your mother will be with you during pre-surgery preparation, Emma will visit before leaving for her hair appointment, and I'll be available during the actual procedure, at least until the ceremony begins." Sarah stared at the schedule, which treated her surgery like a logistical challenge to be managed around more important priorities. Even with all the political pressure and community expectations, her family still saw Emma's wedding as the primary event of October 15th, with Sarah's surgery relegated to a secondary concern that required careful scheduling. "Dad, you're planning to leave during my surgery to attend Emma's wedding?" Sarah asked, though the answer was obvious from the timeline. "The ceremony is at 4 o'clock, and Dr. Chen estimated your surgery would be complete by 3:30. It should work out perfectly, and you'll be unconscious during
Recovery anyway. Emma really needs family present for her big moment." The casual dismissal of her recovery needs in favor of wedding photography revealed that despite all the political pressure and strategic support planning, her family's fundamental priorities remained unchanged. They were providing the minimum support necessary to meet community expectations while still prioritizing Emma's celebration. Sarah realized that Governor Hendricks's intervention had achieved practical support for her surgery, but couldn't change the underlying dynamics that made her family prioritize social obligations over genuine care and concern. She would have help during her recovery, but she would also have the knowledge that this help was provided reluctantly and primarily for political reasons. The night before her surgery, Sarah received one final call from Governor Hendricks herself. "Dr. Martinez, I wanted to check in before your procedure tomorrow. I trust that your family support situation has improved?" "It has, Governor, and I'm grateful for your intervention. Though I have to admit, it's been educational to learn that I needed political pressure to get my family's attention during a medical crisis." Governor Hendricks was quiet for a moment before responding. "Dr. Martinez, I've been in politics long enough to understand that people respond to different motivations. Your family needed to understand that supporting healthcare workers serves their own interests as well as yours. Sometimes that's the only way to achieve the right outcome." "I appreciate your pragmatic approach, Governor, but it's difficult not to feel manipulated by the entire situation." "I understand that feeling," Governor Hendricks replied. "But consider this. Your surgery will proceed with comprehensive family support. Your recovery will be well managed, and your husband can focus on his education work without worrying about your medical care. Those are real benefits, regardless of the motivations that produced them." Governor Hendricks went on to explain her broader philosophy about using political influence to protect valuable contributors to state initiatives. "Dr. Martinez, your husband's education work affects thousands of students across our state. His curriculum reforms are producing measurable improvements in educational outcomes, particularly for underserved communities. When I learned that one of my most effective education consultants was dealing with inadequate family support during his wife's major surgery, I felt obligated to intervene." The conversation helped Sarah understand that Governor Hendricks viewed supporting her medical crisis as part of her responsibility to the people working on state initiatives. It was political calculation, but it was also recognition of the human needs of people serving public interests. "Governor, I'm curious about something.
How did you know that political pressure would be effective with my family? How did you know they would respond to community expectations rather than personal appeals? Governor Hendricks laughed softly. Dr. Martinez, successful politics requires understanding how different people respond to different motivations. Your family's social and business connections made them vulnerable to political pressure in ways that personal appeals might not have been. When people depend on political relationships for their success, they become very responsive to political expectations. It was a sophisticated understanding.
Human psychology and social dynamics that explained how Governor Hendricks had so effectively orchestrated support for Sarah's surgery. She'd identified the pressure points that would motivate Sarah's family and applied exactly the right amount of influence to achieve the desired outcome. I have to admit, Governor, it's impressive political maneuvering. But it's also somewhat depressing to realize that my family needed to be politically pressured into supporting my medical crisis. Dr. Martinez, families are complicated systems with their own internal dynamics and priorities. Sometimes external pressure is necessary to help families recognize their obligations to each other. The important thing is that you'll have the support you need tomorrow, and your recovery will be properly managed. As Sarah prepared for bed the night before her surgery, she reflected on everything that had happened since her initial conversation with her parents about her medical needs. Governor Hendricks's intervention had transformed her surgery from a dismissed inconvenience into a community priority, but it had also revealed the fundamentally transactional nature of her family relationships. She would have support during her surgery and recovery, but that support would come with the knowledge that it required political pressure to materialize. Her family's sudden concern for her well-being was genuine in its practical effects, but artificial in its motivations. James found her sitting on their balcony, staring out at the Chicago skyline and processing the complex emotions surrounding her upcoming surgery. "Are you ready for tomorrow?" he asked, settling into the chair beside her. "As ready as I can be for surgery that required gubernatorial intervention to get family support," Sarah replied. "I'm grateful for the outcome, but the process has been eye-opening about our family dynamics." "Sarah, I want you to know that regardless of anyone else's motivations, you have my complete support and love. Politics didn't create my commitment to you. That's genuine and unconditional." Looking at her husband, Sarah realized that Governor Hendricks's intervention had accomplished something beyond just ensuring family support for her surgery. It had highlighted the stark contrast between transactional relationships based on social utility and genuine relationships based on love and mutual respect. Her parents and sister were supporting her surgery because political pressure made it advantageous to do so. James was supporting her surgery because he loved her and wanted her to be healthy and happy. The difference in motivation created entirely different experiences of care and concern. "James, I love you for being the one person in this situation whose support comes from genuine care rather than political calculation." That's what marriage should be, Sarah. Unconditional support during difficult times, not strategic positioning for social advantage. As they prepared for bed, Sarah felt as ready as she could be for the surgery that would take place in just a few hours. She had comprehensive family support, excellent medical care, and a husband whose love wasn't dependent on political pressure or social expectations. The irony wasn't lost on her that it had taken the governor's intervention to achieve family support for her surgery, but she was grateful for the outcome regardless of the process that had produced it. Tomorrow would bring surgery, recovery, and the beginning of a new chapter for the young married couple. Understanding how her family relationships had been permanently changed by the events of the past few weeks. The morning of October 15th arrived with unseasonable warmth for Chicago, sunlight streaming through the hospital windows as Sarah prepared for her surgery. James had been awake since 5, quietly moving around their apartment to gather the items they'd need for her hospital stay. His calm efficiency masked the anxiety Sarah knew he was feeling. though he'd never admit to being worried about a procedure that Dr. Chen had assured them was routine for someone with her expertise. At Northwestern Memorial, the pre-surgical preparation proceeded exactly as Dr. Chen had outlined during their consultations. Sarah changed into hospital scrubs, completed the final paperwork, and submitted to the battery of tests that would confirm her readiness for the spinal procedure. James sat beside her bed, holding her hand, and making quiet conversation about everything except the surgery itself. At 8:30, Sarah's mother arrived carrying an elaborate flower arrangement and wearing the kind of outfit she typically reserved for important social functions. Her makeup was perfect, her jewelry carefully selected, and her smile carried the practiced brightness Sarah remembered from childhood events where appearances mattered more than emotions. "Darling, you look so calm and prepared," her mother said, kissing Sarah's cheek carefully to avoid disturbing her own lipstick. "Dr. Chen has such an excellent reputation. Mrs. Patterson had her back surgery done here last year, and she speaks very highly of the entire program." Sarah noticed that her mother's conversation focused on the social connections and reputational aspects of her medical care, rather than her actual health concerns or emotional needs. Even in the hospital room, preparing for major surgery, her mother was filtering the experience through her social network's experiences and opinions. "Mom, how are you feeling about today?" Sarah asked, genuinely curious whether her mother had any personal anxiety about her daughter undergoing a significant medical procedure. "Oh, I'm confident everything will go smoothly," her mother replied, consulting her phone to check the time. "Emma's having her hair done at 11, and I need to be there to help coordinate with the photographers. But I wanted to be here for your pre-surgery time, of course." The casual mention of Emma's wedding preparations, even while sitting in Sarah's hospital room, reinforced everything Sarah had learned about her family's priorities over the past few weeks. Her mother was fulfilling her obligation to be present for Sarah's surgery, but her attention was clearly divided between multiple commitments. At 9:15, Emma arrived with David and Mrs. Whitmore, creating a small crowd around Sarah's hospital bed. Emma looked stunning even in casual clothes, her hair already styled in preparation for professional photos later that morning. She carried a small gift bag and wore the kind of nervous energy Sarah associated with major life events. "Sarah, I wanted to give you something before your surgery," Emma said, pulling an elegant jewelry box from the gift bag. "It's the pearl bracelet Grandma left me, and I thought you should wear it today for good luck." Sarah opened the box to find their grandmother's antique pearl bracelet, a family heirloom that Emma had always treasured. The gesture was genuinely thoughtful, though Sarah suspected it
was also calculated to demonstrate family solidarity in front of Mrs. Whitmore and the hospital staff. "Emma, this is beautiful, but are you sure you want me to wear it during surgery? What if something happens to it?" "That's exactly why you should wear it," Emma replied. "Grandma always said these pearls were meant to protect the women in our family during important moments. Today certainly qualifies." David stepped forward to add his own well wishes, speaking with the formal courtesy Sarah had come to expect from him. "Sarah, our entire family is thinking of you today. We've arranged for someone to check on your progress every hour during the ceremony, and we'll visit as soon as the reception allows." Mrs. Whitmore's presence added a layer of formality to the gathering that made Sarah feel like she was receiving a diplomatic visit rather than family support. The older woman spoke knowledgeably about spinal surgery procedures and recovery timelines, demonstrating the kind of research she typically conducted before involving herself in any situation. "Dr. Chen's success rates with this type of procedure are exceptional," Mrs. Whitmore observed. "The recovery timeline should allow you to resume normal activities well before the holidays, which works out perfectly for everyone's schedule." Sarah noticed that even Mrs. Whitmore's supportive comments were framed in terms of scheduling convenience and outcome optimization rather than personal concern for Sarah's well-being. It was characteristic of how her family approached every situation, including medical crises. At 10 o'clock, Dr. Chan arrived to conduct her final pre-surgical consultation with Sarah. The surgeon's presence immediately shifted the atmosphere in the room from social visiting to serious medical business. Dr. Chen reviewed the surgical plan,
confirmed Sarah's understanding of the procedure and recovery requirements, and answered the few remaining questions James had about postoperative care. Dr. Martinez, you're in excellent health otherwise, and this procedure should resolve your symptoms completely, Dr. Chen said confidently. The tumor is positioned exactly where we expected based on your imaging, and the surgical approach is straightforward. You should expect full recovery of normal function within 6 to 8 weeks. Sarah's family listened attentively to Dr. Chen's explanation, asking intelligent questions about surgical techniques and recovery milestones. Their engagement with the medical details was genuine, even if their emotional support felt orchestrated for political and social reasons. After Dr. Chen left to prepare for surgery, Sarah's father arrived carrying coffee and newspapers, settling into the hospital room as if he were attending a business meeting. His presence completed the family gathering, though Sarah noticed he seemed distracted by text messages and phone calls related to last-minute wedding coordination. "The weather's going to be perfect for outdoor photos," her father announced, consulting his phone for updated forecasts. "Emma's photographer wants to start at 2:30, which gives us plenty of time to be here for Sarah's surgery and still coordinate everything for the ceremony."
Medical needs and Emma's celebration. James observed these family dynamics quietly, offering his own steady presence without commenting on the obvious tensions between genuine care and social obligation. Sarah appreciated his restraint, knowing that he could see exactly what she was experiencing, but choosing not to complicate an already complex situation. At 11 o'clock, the pre-surgical team arrived to begin Sarah's preparation for the operating room. As the medical staff began their final preparations, Sarah's family gathered around her bed for what would likely be their last conversation before the procedure. "We love you and will be thinking of you every moment," her mother said, squeezing Sarah's hand with what appeared to be genuine emotion. "Dr. Chen is going to take excellent care of you and will be right here when you wake up." Emma leaned down to kiss Sarah's forehead, careful not to disturb the pearl bracelet they'd fastened around Sarah's wrist. "I'll be thinking of you during the ceremony, Sarah. This is going to be the most important day for both of us, just in different ways." The comment encapsulated Emma's worldview perfectly, treating Sarah's surgery and her own wedding as parallel important events, rather than recognizing the fundamental difference between a medical procedure and a social celebration. For Emma, both events were significant personal milestones, deserving equal consideration and support. Sarah's father approached her bed with uncharacteristic emotion visible in his expression. "Sarah, I know we haven't always understood your choices, but we're proud of the doctor you've become and the life you've built. James is lucky to have you, and we're lucky to have you both in our family." The acknowledgement was more personal than anything her father had said to her in years, though Sarah suspected it was influenced by his recent understanding of James's political connections and professional influence. Still, she chose to accept it as genuine sentiment, rather than strategic positioning. As the medical team prepared to transport Sarah to the operating room, James took her hand and spoke quietly enough that only she could hear his words. "I love you more than anything in this world, and I'll be right here when you wake up. Dr. Chin is going to fix everything, and in a few weeks, this will all be behind us. Focus on getting better, and don't worry about anything else." His words carried the unconditional love and support that Sarah had been seeking from her family, reminding her that she had genuine care and concern, even if it didn't come from the sources she'd originally hoped for. James's presence made the political complexity of her family's support seem less important than the practical outcome of having help during her recovery. At 11:30, Sarah was wheeled into the operating room, where Dr. Chin and her surgical team were already preparing for the procedure. The operating room was bright and sterile, filled with the sophisticated equipment that would guide Dr. Chin through the delicate process of removing the tumor pressing against Sarah's spinal cord. As the anesthesia took effect, Sarah's last conscious thought was about the strange journey that had brought her to this moment. What had started as a family conflict about scheduling priorities had evolved into a complex political intervention that ensured she had comprehensive support during her medical crisis. Governor Hendricks had used her influence to create the support she needed, politically absolutely,
Sarah needed, even if the motivations weren't entirely pure. The surgery proceeded exactly as Dr. Chen had predicted. The tumor was successfully removed without complications, and Sarah's spinal cord was freed from the pressure that had been causing her symptoms. The procedure took slightly longer than expected, finishing at 3:45 rather than the 3:30 Dr. Chen had originally estimated. In the waiting room, Sarah's family monitored the surgery's progress while simultaneously coordinating Emma's wedding preparations via phone and text message. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.